Well, my name is Rich Carson. I have about 45 years experience as a manager, a consultant, and academic. And I spent really the first 30 years as a manager, kind of learning my executive management craft. I got into the field of organizational change management when I actually hired a consultant group to audit my organization. I was actually asked to do this by the people that hired me. And I enjoyed that process so much that I went back to school and got my doctorate work in change management or organizational behavior, and went to work for the company that I had hired, and they hired me, and I ended up doing another 10 years as a consultant, actually doing change management studies.
So I'm going to dig into your brain a little bit today, and you talked in
Sure.
particular about your expertise on your 3 E's model of change. So I look
Yeah.
forward to your chat about that. Hi, welcome to Governance Bites. My name is Mark Banicevich, and today I have the pleasure of spending time with Dr. Richard Carson. Richard, thank you very much again for your time today.
Thank
We
you.
have managed to make the time zones work. You're in Pacific Standard Time in the US, and I'm in New Zealand Standard Time. So we made that work. A good afternoon. Our
Yes.
topic today is your 3 E's model around performance efficient, cost effective, and culturally empowered. Can you start by briefly describing what those 3 E's are, please?
Well, the simplest one to understand is cost effective. The three are cost effective, performance efficient, culturally empowered. Cost effective, whether you're public sector or private sector, is the bottom line cost of doing business. Performance efficient is a little different. It's really about more intangibles that may or may not affect costs, such as your delivery times, customer relations, response times. In other words, this is especially true in the government sector. How long does it take you to get back to somebody who's contacted you? Just as an aside, in my last organization, I had a 24-hour callback rule. Instead of getting back 2, 3 a week later, within 24 hours, we tried to get back to the person who contacted us. The other one is cultural empowerment, which really means in the process of change management, you involve everybody externally and internally. It's very important to involve the staff, from the front counter staff, the people that are in contact with the customers, all the way up to your managers. And your stakeholders could be vendors, the people that are supplying you. In the public sector, of course, it's voters. They are the consumer. So cultural, a lot of times what you don't want to do, and what I've seen happen, is a board of directors basically thinks that something needs to be changed. They go to the manager, the director, executive director, or CEO, and say, this is what you need to change. Well, that may not be the actual problem. So the process of change management is really to do an assessment to try and get to what the real underlying issues are. And they may be what the board of directors thinks, and it may not.
What is the relevance? You've just briefly alluded to this in your answer there, but I'll ask you to expand on this a little bit more. The relevance of the 3E model to the board of directors or to boards of directors generally.
Well, I think it's important, just like I said with the last one, in terms of cultural empowerment, they may just think that what the staff thinks is irrelevant. The staff really is the problem. So it's really important for them to understand the change management process and why those 3 aspects of the process will add value to the recommendations. And it won't be it may not be what they think. I've had a couple of cases. I've had at least one nonprofit where they didn't like it. They were almost insulted by it. In other words, they were the problem, and they basically took the document and put it on the shelf, and told me in no uncertain terms they never wanted to see it have the light of day. So, what the board thinks should happen, and it's just important that they understand the process, and it's important to get buy-in from the board, from the executive director, CEO, and everybody down to the vendors and the line staff. Everybody needs to really buy into this. A lot of times, especially with the staff, people don't like change. Let's put it that way. People resist change, and it's very important to get them to understand that the process will not only benefit them, but will include them. And once I have basically, in some cases, actually set up work groups around specific topics and said to the folks, look, we want you, because you know best how this piece of the process works, to tell us what you think works and doesn't work. And once you get that buy-in from the line staff, then you really get a good product.
Right. So we're talking about an organization that is not necessarily aligned with where it needs to be going. A board of directors is often at a very high level, stepping into the organization for very short periods, once a month, once a quarter, once every 6 weeks. And they'll get an idea of what's going on, but the idea of what's going on may not be correct. And it's about really getting into the organization itself to identify what the need for change is.
Exactly.
And where the 3E model can help that you've described is by helping the organization understand what the grassroots problems are and then make the change to get the organization in the direction it's going.
Yes. It's important that the leadership buys into first and foremost. They buy into the process. Once you've explained kind of the 3 E's, what the process is, how it works, and where it might end up, they really need to buy into that. If they don't buy into it, then basically what they're saying is, I've had this happen. I've talked to other people where this has happened, where the purpose of hiring a consultant is to do their dirty bidding, right? And that way, well, it wasn't us. It's this guy over here. He said to do this. Well, if that's the case, then personally, I don't want anything to do with it. If they don't buy into the process, and basically they want me to do their bidding because they have a personal agenda, right? Then there's no point even going down that road.
Yeah, it needs to be an honest desire to find the problem and change and sort of resolve the problem. Now, you've written about this model in your book, The Book of Change.
Yes.
What I'd like to do, if I may, is just dig into each of the 3 E's in a little bit more detail. So we'll just take them one at a time. And if I can just ask you to describe a little bit about it and maybe dig into a little bit of detail, starting with performance efficient. What do we mean? And what do you mean by performance efficient? And can you give us a couple of examples?
Well, performance efficiency was something that was really kind of founded, I think, by Edward Deming. And it's the idea is coming up with metrics that you can measure. One of the things you can do with performance efficiency is to do surveys, kind of front end and back end surveys. It could be attitudinal. In other words, when you do the initial survey in terms of performance efficiency, what do your customers think works and doesn't work? And once you set up recommendations, to go back and actually either do kind of perception surveys or have real metrics in terms of, well, like I said, if you want people to get back to their customers within 24 hours, You can actually have staff keep phone logs of when people called, who called, when, and report those statistics on a monthly basis. I actually did that and made a contest out of it, because I had 7 work groups reporting to me, and I would, once a month, I would let everybody know in a management meeting, and then broadcast it through kind of an internal newsletter who was doing well and who wasn't. It isn't that anybody got punished, but it got to the point where people wanted to do better.
Yes. Yeah.
They wanted to look like they were doing better.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, because Deming's work originally started out in manufacturing, right, which led to the huge change in Japan in the 70s. And
yes.
So, we've had to adapt that kind of manufacturing performance efficiency mindset to more of a service model, as you describe, in terms of call volumes and things. And a lot of businesses these days have the technology to automatically collect those data. If they don't, then collecting it manually can be very valuable. And the first step towards improving efficiency is understanding the current efficiency for which you need data. You need to analyze data and find out where you're currently at, set some goals, and move your way forward.
Yeah, I mean, the famous saying is, what gets measured gets done.
Yes.
And that's very true. In other words, it's called accountability. It's one thing to tell somebody, well, this is what you need to do. But one of the things that's very important is, if you're going to make a recommendation, you need to provide timelines and resources to do that. It's one thing just to say, well, okay, I want you to do this, but they have to, they really need a structure that you say, well, I'm going to give you X amount of resources, could be dollars, could be people, could be consultants, whatever it may be, and you need to accomplish these tasks within this time frame with this result. And that accountability is really, really important.
That really does summarize what we mean by performance efficiency, doesn't it? It's quality output over time.
Yep.
So let's move on then to cost effective, because you're then adding another element to this concept of how much money it's costing you to deliver this. Can you dig into that a little bit more?
Well, it's the same thing in terms of metrics. You need to look at where you are, and what's your baseline, and then you work with the individual work groups in terms of what their goal is, and basically, I mean, just trying to get to the bottom line, whether it's in the public sector or the private sector. There's a cost of doing business, and the idea basically is, especially governments went through a lot of this in terms of one thing I was going to mention is, in the private sector you've got economic cycles. Okay, in the public sector you've got election cycles, and so every 4 years you may have a whole new group of people with a lot of preconceived ideas about what needs to be done, and in the public sector it always comes down to, you need to be more cost effective.
Right.
Period. I mean, you get complaints from the customers in terms of the fees are too high, you're taking too long, it's costing me too much, that kind of thing. So cost effective is very much in the eye of the beholder.
Right. So with the first 2 metrics we've talked about, essentially time efficiency and then cost efficiency, or in the first case, it's the performance efficiency is around time, and the cost effectiveness is then around money. And the third element you're adding to it with culturally empowered is around people. So can you dig into that one a little bit more for us?
Yeah, this is one that's really overlooked. Organizations are made up of people. Okay, and so all organizations have a culture, whether it's a mom and pop shop or whether it's IBM or what, they have their own culture. But cultural empowerment is that if you're going to have successful change, it has to come from the bottom up. It's not enough to say, okay, we're going to make these changes whether you like it or not. And like I said, people resist that kind of thing. Their attitude is, well, we've always done it this way. Why would we do it differently? So cultural empowerment is basically empowering the employees to come up with changes that are needed. And if they come up with those changes, then they won't resist it, basically. They will help you implement the changes. Otherwise, not only will they might resist it, they might sabotage it in terms of the change.
Your people are often, they're closest to the problem, so they're often in a position to be more effective at identifying solutions to the problem. And as you say, they then get greater buy-in. So across the model, we've got 3 points, essentially time, money, and people. How can boards of directors then use this model, the 3 E's model, to drive positive change within their organizations? You've talked before about they have to be bought into it. They have to actually be wanting to make change. So imagine you've got a board of directors in an organization that has some problems. They want to find out what these problems are and resolve them. They're really passionate about getting that right. How do they then use the 3 E's model to do that?
I think what really needs to happen is has to do with their ability to make sure that the changes are implemented. In other words, a lot of times it becomes, well, here it is. We got the recommendations. It becomes a shelf document. And that's all that happens. What needs to happen is that the changes, and I think that change is something that is ongoing, not change for the sake of change, but change needs to be something that is revisited over time. What you need to do is implement organizational change through a strategic plan. And it needs to be a 3 to 5 year plan, mainly because you don't always have the resources to do it all at once. So you phase the recommendations and the implementation over time through multi-year budgeting. So you say, okay, we think that these recommendations are like tier 1, and we'll do it in the first year. Here's the resources you need. Here's the money, the people, the infrastructure to do it, and here's the timeline you have. So go to it. But there are other things, tier 2, 3, 4, whatever, it can't be done right away because you really don't have the resources, but you don't think they're as important or as much of a priority. Let's put it that way. You prioritize the recommendations over time. So strategic planning, multi-year budgeting, that's the board's job. Once they know what needs to be changed, it's up to them to make sure it happens.
Yes, right. I remember when I was consulting, a really useful model that we'd use for all of the desired changes was you'd have 2 axes. One would be how complex they are to implement in terms of time and money, and the other one would be the impact on the business. So using that metric, you'd be able to identify a few quick wins that would have fairly high impact and very low cost, get those done very quickly. And then you'd also be looking at trying to start work on some high impact and high cost ones at the same time. So you're delivering some positive impacts so that the organization can see that it's working while you're chipping away at the large ones. And then the other thing that you have to keep in mind is interdependencies between those projects. So there may be some precedents where project A has to be done before project B can be started. So get those metrics in place and yes, plan your timeline and get underway.
Yeah, in the private sector, you might prioritize in terms of profitability. In the public sector, it can be much more a matter of perception. What did the voters, the public, in the assessment process tell you was the problem? And it's not always money. It could be, like I said, it could be timelines, especially let's say in the development industry. Time is money. The longer their process, they may not have a problem paying the fee, But if the process drags out for months after months, their interest payments really mount up. So in the public sector, it could be a matter of perception. Like I said, just how long does it take you to get back to a citizen? One of the things that a lot of that I call it the culture of no. A lot of times, a citizen will come into the front counter and say, "Well, I want to do this. I want to add on to my house, or want to do this or do that." And somebody will say to them, "No, you can't do that. Just go away. No, you can't do that." Well, in reality, in the public sector, there's always a way to do what you want. It may be very onerous, it may be expensive, it may be timely, but there always is a process. You can change ordinances, you know. So, one of the things I tried to do in the public sector was just stop people from that kind of just blowing people off.
Yep, that's understandable.
And that's simply a matter of perception. There's no money associated with it, but how you treat people is very, and the private sector understands that much better than the public sector.
Yes, indeed. Can you give an example of where large organizations use the 3E model to drive a major successful change?
Sure. I'll use myself as an example. When I took this job and I managing about 165 people, I had a $17 million annual budget. I was hired and they told me, "Look, your organization is really dysfunctional. You need to fix it. That's your job. You need it. That's why we're hiring you. You need to fix it." And I had at the time that the county auditor had just got elected. And he was telling people that he was going to change things. He was going to do performance audits. So I went to him. I said, "Look, would you audit me?" And he looked at me like I was nuts. It's like, what? I said, "Look, I'm a new guy. You're a new guy. If you do this performance audit of me now, it'll be to my credit. If you do it of me 3 years from now, I might get fired." And he goes, "Well, okay. That makes sense." So he brought in a consulting company that had done some work that he knew of, did performance audits, and that's where I learned about the 3 E's. It was experiential. Okay.
Right.
I learned about it because there was a lot of complaints from developers, basically, that it was too expensive, it wasn't cost effective. The public, citizens, not developers, but the other side of this equation, citizens, were saying, "Look, no one ever calls me back. I never hear back from anybody, or if I do, their attitude really sucks." And in the last part was I learned about cultural empowerment, because basically I needed to bring my managers and staff on board, and I spent a lot of time talking to the consultants about this. And they were pretty savvy about that. So what I did is I set up work groups, and the work groups, and I said, "Look, this is what we're being told is a problem. I want you to look at this within your realm and tell me how you could improve it, what you think can be done or can't be done." So I really learned about the 3 E's the hard way, by experiencing all three and what worked and what didn't work. And the important thing was in the beginning was to really do an assessment of the issues. Really talk to people on staff, to citizens, to vendors, about what the real issues were beyond what the board. It was a county board. It was beyond what they thought was the issue. And a couple of them were two of the three were brand new. And one of the things I've noticed over time, I've worked in numerous city, county, regional, and state agencies. I worked for 3 governors in the state of Oregon. And every time there's an election, somebody comes in and wants to change something because that's what they ran on, whether it's rational or not, whether it's just like you get to the point where, oh, here it comes. We got the election. We know what's going to happen. So you'll learn to kind of manage it. The odd thing is that as these people who came on hell bent on making changes, maybe 5, 6, 7 years later, they start to understand how things work.
I've got one final question for you.
Yeah. Yes.
You've worked at a large number of boards.
Yeah.
What is the advice you find yourself most commonly giving to directors?
Well, there's two. Well, first of all, I've been on 5 different nonprofits, and one of the biggest problems is that what's really needed is change on the board, and I firmly believe that term limits are the answer, because what happens is that a lot of boards have been there forever. The people have been there forever, and a lot of times I've had it a couple of times. I mean, it's the directors who come to me and kind of say, "Well, I have a problem. It's them." Is there some way that we can engage them in this change management process? And change on a board is important. You really need new blood, new ideas to make change happen. So one of the things I've tried to get boards to understand is, first and foremost, is that change is a good thing, that they should have both a person on the board and on the staff who is a change manager. The person who is whole job. I mean, usually when you have a board, you have people who are, that handle the budget, maybe personnel. They'll have people in terms of programs, things like that. But you really have somebody who is a change manager in that kind of position. In my last job, I actually had a person. Once we were done with the whole change management kind of assessment process, recommendations, I had one person whose sole job was being the change manager. And her job was basically to go around to the different work groups and basically say, look, we gave you these resources, we gave you these timelines, we gave you these products, how are you doing? And, you're really, in other words, you have a person who's really on top of that. The other, in terms of cultural empowerment, I had a human resource manager, and I put her in the office right next to mine because I needed somebody who was a sounding board in terms of cultural empowerment to make sure that people were on board. And it isn't that I'm an insensitive guy, but I needed somebody to kind of bounce things off of and say, well, look, what if we do this or what if we do that? So she would kind of evaluate those kind of ideas from both a legalistic point of view, but also how well it would be received and how better it could be delivered.
Richard, that's been really great. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
I'll look forward to catching up again soon. And
okay.
I'll see you next episode.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you for watching this episode of Governance Bites. We have more episodes on YouTube and your favorite podcast channel, where I interview directors and experts on various topics relating to boards of directors and governance. We'd love to see you back, and please like, subscribe, and share the videos and podcasts.